Number 10. World War II tank and other vehicles. Saipan is the largest of the Mariana Islands, a commonwealth of the U.S. located some 5,900 miles from the American mainland in the western Pacific Ocean. It's here that the United States and Japan went head-to-head in the Battle of Saipan from June 15 to July 9, 1944. The skirmish ended with a U.S. victory and the capture of Saipan from the Japanese. There are numerous historical sites on the island that were left behind by both the U.S. and Japan. Several Sherman M4 tanks were deserted off Chalan Kanoa Beach, where they can be found today sitting in about 10 feet of water. They remain intact and are easy and popular diving attractions. There are also 2 submerged Japanese planes, 2 American planes, a handful of merchant ships, some landing vehicles, and more. Divers can explore these and other vehicles, including the wrecked Japanese naval ship Shoan Maru, which sits in about 30 feet of water. For more experienced adventurers, there's an underwater pile of World War II junk, filled with airplane parts, jeeps, and other items that the Navy discarded during its time on Saipan. Number 9. Grossingers Resort. Located about a 2-hour drive from New York City, the Catskills are popular among New Yorkers as a place to get away from the hustle and bustle of the Big Apple. Nicknamed the Borscht Belt or the Jewish Alps, the region became especially popular among Jewish families who established numerous kosher resorts between the 1920s and the 60s. As flights to Miami and other beach destinations became cheaper, these establishments declined in popularity and were mostly all closed by the 1970s. One resort that survived longer than most was Grossingers in the town of Liberty. Described in a 1954 review as the Waldorf in the Catskills, it's said to be the inspiration for the movie Dirty Dancing. Grossingers was all about luxury. It was the first resort in the U.S. to use artificial snow for its ski runs and was known to frequently attract celebrity visitors. The sprawling family-owned business spanned 1,200 acres and consisted of over 35 buildings. It had its own private airfield, a golf course, hotel space, a massive dining room that could seat 1,300 guests, an ice rink, a nightclub, an indoor pool, and more. The resort began to decline after its owner, Jenny Grossinger, passed away in 1972. It closed its doors for good in 1986 and fell into disrepair. Nature reclaimed the space, serving as a sad reminder that Liberty's glory days were over. The town eventually decided to pursue economic growth by razing the defunct resort so that something can take its place. Demolition began in 2018, but the resort and its ruins live on in photographs. Number 8. Temple of Santiago. A brutal drought hit southern Mexico in 2015, causing local water levels to drop dramatically. In the state of Chiapas, a 16th-century church emerged from the Nezahualcoyotl Reservoir, where it normally sat 100 feet underwater. Known as the Temple of Santiago, the church was built in 1564 in anticipation of a population surge in the region. But Chiapas never became the bustling urban center it was envisioned to become. Architect Carlos Navarretes said that the Temple of Santiago probably never even had a dedicated priest. The church was abandoned during a plague that lasted from 1773 to 1776. Its ruins were submerged in 1966 with the creation of the reservoir. Since then, the water has dropped low enough for people to walk through the site on at least 2 occasions in 2002 and 2015. Ironically, the Temple of Santiago seems much more celebrated in modern times than it was in the colonial era. Whenever it reappears, locals flock to the site to explore, eat, and socialize. Would you check out this site if you were in the region when water levels dropped? Tell me in the comments below. Number 7. Kaiokoi. Nestled among Turkey's Taurus Mountains near the Mediterranean coastline, there's a village filled with weathered streets and decaying stone buildings. It's quite clear from looking at it that nobody lives there. Built during the 18th century as Karmilassos, the town was originally home to a Greek Orthodox population. By the early 20th century, it was home to as many as 20,000 residents. From 1919 to 1922, the Greeks and Turks fought over competing land claims in what became known as the Greco-Turkish War. The violence that came along with the Greek loss was often aimed at Orthodox communities in Turkish territory. Many villages fled in droves, while others chose to stay. In the meantime, Turkish Muslims in Greece bore the brunt of the country's rivalry. To curb the bloodshed, the Greek and Turkish governments began a population exchange in 1923. This meant that even though the residents of Kaiokoi had been lucky enough to continue living peacefully among their Turkish neighbors, they had no choice but to leave and return to Greece. The war and ensuing population exchange created a refugee crisis in both countries as authorities scrambled to find housing for the influx of residents. Yet the 350 houses in Kaiokoi remained vacant. Resettled Turkish Muslims didn't want to live in empty Greek Orthodox villages because of rumors they'd heard about the death that happened in some of them. Time has taken a toll on Kaiokoi's buildings, which look more ancient than they really are. They remain standing as a historical monument and a reminder of the forced relocation that upended hundreds of thousands of people's lives. Number 6. Quinlan Castle. If you've driven through the streets of Birmingham, Alabama, you might have seen a seemingly out-of-place building that resembles a castle. Located along 9th Avenue, this medieval-style 4-story structure is an abandoned apartment complex known as Quinlan Castle. Its designer, William Welton, was inspired by the castles he saw over in Europe during World War I. During World War II, there were rumors that Quinlan Castle operated as a secret Nazi or communist stronghold. The police investigated but found no evidence to support these claims. To get away from the negative reputation that the ordeal left the building with, its owner renamed it the Royal Arms Apartments. Its new slogan was "Living Quarters Fit for a King." The site was abandoned sometime during the 1990s and was left to deteriorate as the city tried figuring out what to do with it. A non-profit science research organization called Southern Research recently bought the property, where it plans to build a new center dedicated to studying infectious diseases. Quinlan Castle was demolished at the end of January to make room for the building that will replace it. Number 5. The Bay of Abandoned Hotels. Along the Adriatic coastline near the Croatian seaside town of Kupari, there's a collection of 5 derelict, overgrown hotels that have clearly all seen better days. Nicknamed the Bay of Hotels, they were built during the 1960s when what was now Croatia was part of Yugoslavia. The upscale hotels could accommodate up to 1,600 people altogether. Nearby, there was a campground with room for 4,000 people, as well as numerous private villas. The resort was built largely with military funding, and as it grew in popularity, it became increasingly difficult for ordinary people to book a room. Consequently, it became known as a place for the military elite. Things changed drastically throughout the region after Croatia declared independence from Yugoslavia in 1991. A war ensued and Croatian soldiers took up residence at the hotels. Over a several-week period, Yugoslavian forces destroyed the resort that they had created, looting and burning the hotels in a bid to drive out the Croatians. The war ended in 1995 with a Croatian victory, but the region is still littered with reminders of the violence today, with once bustling sites simply left to rot. But the area has seen an uptick in vacationers in recent years, and the decaying hotels are catching investors' attention, suggesting that the property may be revived at some point in the near future. Would you visit this region and check out the ruins, or wait for a revival? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Number 4. A western village in Japan. Roughly 70 miles north of Tokyo near the city of Nikko, there's a deserted theme park resembling a western town. Here you'll see a Mount Rushmore replica, American flags, and the same types of buildings that once filled America's boomtowns during the gold rush era, including a saloon, sheriff's station, prison, general store, and a blacksmith shop. Opened in 1973, the park was inspired by classic western films as well as the sci-fi movie Westworld. It closed in 2007 and has since become an attraction for urban explorers. The overgrowth that has taken over simply adds to the eeriness of the large robots and sculptures of characters that can be seen throughout the property. Because it's located near the sleepy suburb of Shin-Takatoku, where not much goes on, it's unlikely that the park will be torn down anytime soon to make way for development. So it'll hopefully remain open to curious visitors for years to come. Number 3. Whittenum. Founded in 1946, Whittenum was a Western Australian mining town that was built to house workers for a nearby asbestos mine. At the time, the dangers of asbestos weren't widely known, so people didn't think twice about harvesting or using it, and it was a common building material. Whittenum's population grew rapidly. By the early 1950s, it was the largest town in northwestern Australia's Pilbara region with a population of nearly 900 residents. People stopped using asbestos as they caught on to the health hazards it poses. The demand for the raw material fell, and in 1966 the mines at Whittenum were closed. More than 2,000 cancer-related deaths have been traced to the deadly mining activities there. The Australian government began to phase down the population in 1978, but some were reluctant to leave despite the dangers associated with Whittenum. They rejected the state's offers to buy their properties as the authorities began demolishing houses and closed the town's motel, gas station, pub, police station, and airport. The electricity was cut in 2006, and in 2007, mail stopped being delivered there. In 2008, Whittenum was condemned. Still, a handful of residents refused to leave, and several of the town's buildings still stand. There are 2 remaining permanent residents today who continue to defy the government's plans to bulldoze the town and decontaminate the area. Lawmakers have introduced legislation to seize the remaining inhabited properties from their owners. It seems as though Whittenum's days are numbered, but that these last few holdouts are really going to stubbornly stay put until they're literally forced out. Number 2. Russia's frozen ghost town. Located in the Russian Arctic, Vorkuta is a Soviet-era coal mining town that was built by forced laborers during the 1930s. It became home to one of the deadliest gulags in history, known as Vorkutlag. After Stalin's death in 1953, people from all over Russia began to move to the city for mining jobs, despite the frigid winter temperatures which dip as low as -58 degrees Fahrenheit. Vorkuta became a thriving metropolis with a population that peaked at around 250,000 during the 1980s. It boasted high-quality schools, stores, medical clinics, and other services, even though it was isolated from the rest of the world with no roads leading in or out, and winters that last for up to 10 months. The collapse of the Soviet Union saw the closure of many of the area's mines, and people left in droves. Today, only 4 of the 13 original coal mines are still open, and less than 60,000 residents remain. Both the city itself and the surrounding towns are filled with abandoned apartment buildings, businesses, and cultural centers. Last year, photographer Maria Passer visited Vorkuta and its nearby ghost towns, where she snapped pictures of deserted apartment interiors filled with snow and encased in ice. She described what she saw as both disastrous and breathtaking. Some buildings that certainly look abandoned and which seem to be falling apart still have a handful of residents inside. You'd never know by looking at them from the outside. Slowly but surely, the region is falling into ruin, with some areas deteriorating visibly faster than others as the exodus continues with no end in sight. Number 1. Chakaltaya Ski Resort. The Chakaltaya Ski Resort in La Paz, Bolivia boasted 3 major distinctions. It was the country's only ski resort, and it was home to the world's highest ski resort and world's highest restaurant. At 17,519 feet above sea level, it sat at a higher altitude than the North Base Camp at Mount Everest. The ski lift at Chakaltaya began operating during the 1930s. Little did anyone know at the time it would have no choice but to eventually close due to climate change. By the time scientists began measuring the rate at which the Chakaltaya Glacier was melting in the 1990s, half of it was already gone. Experts predicted that the 18,000-year-old glacier would disappear entirely by 2015. But it melted even faster than that. All that was left by 2009 were a few patches of ice and snow near the top of the mountain. And of course, without any snow, people can't go skiing. So they stopped coming to the resort, and the resort closed. Its buildings still stand and are maintained by a pair of brothers who remember working at the resort when the mountain was still covered in snow and ice. Visitors can still get a hot meal at the property, and it maintains its Guinness title as the world's highest restaurant. But not many visitors go there to see the abandoned site, and even though there's sometimes enough snow for skiing to be possible, the activity has become a distant memory. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to learn more about exciting abandoned sites that you've never heard of, let me know in the comments down below and be sure to subscribe. I'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.